everybody. It's Jenny Clark with Solvability. We've got another session of Freedom Friday, and this time it's with my friend Traci Shepps. I've known Traci for a number of years, and she was one of the first people that walked up to me and say, I get what you do. And I think it's because I understand what Traci does. She helps small businesses and mid-sized businesses in federal contracting with the whole financial processing, accounting side of their business, because if you want to grow as a federal contractor, you've got to have those processes down and you don't want to mess around. That's why you work with Traci. So Traci, tell us a little bit about Cordia Partners first. You're in Tyson's Corner, right?
Yes, that's where the business is based. And we came out of a big accounting firm, and now we specialize. We're much more focused on providing small to mid-sized businesses with their full back office infrastructure around all the finance and accounting, compliance, and keeping them out of trouble with the government.
Well, I think it's really important when you talk about the government, because kind of we're talking about the IRS, but mostly we're talking about Defense Contract Audit Agency, or DCAA. When small businesses get started, they need to know that they're eventually going to have some accounting processes that meet the requirements of Defense Contract Audit Agency. But when they're just getting going, it's like they get on QuickBooks, they get rolling, you can help them. But when they get to the point where they're dead serious about growth, that's when they really need to have the conversations with you. And so tell them a little bit about, I think we said we talk about 3 or 4 main areas. It's different to have your accounting system set up if you're a government contractor, right? You've got to be able to structure it, and eventually as you grow, you get on bigger systems. So tell us a little bit about what you and I talked about as infrastructure for government contractors, the back office piece, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we always recommend that they build that early, even if it's with QuickBooks. Get started on something, have it set up right, so that you're ready when that big contract you've been looking to win, you're already ready out of the gate, at least with 90%. Build your infrastructure, surround yourself with the right people. So whether that's a Cordia for your accounting, have the right mentors to help you get there, and then you'll be able to build that faster.
Well, I think you're making really good points, because with federal contractors, you got to be surrounding yourself with a network of people that you can have conversations with. You've got to be in a place where you can constantly learn, because the rules change a little bit. And when we say the rules, we don't really mean the rules that the government sets out for the federal acquisition regulation, as much as we mean, oh, you're small, do this, you're bigger, do that. You want to work for Department of Energy, do this. You want to work with Army, it's a slightly different thing. Also, it could depend a little bit about whether you do products or services. And most of the companies we've been working with all the time have been services companies. And when the main things people ask me about is, why do I have to fill out timesheets? Well, how do you bill if you don't know the hours worked? So it's things that are alien to people in the commercial world. What do the components say of that accounting system? Because it's never just QuickBooks, it's other pieces, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You want the components of QuickBooks set up right, obviously, but then you need timekeeping. You need to know what you're spending. You need some kind of structure. So you want to have a budget, and whether that's outside of the system or as you get larger, it's inside of the system. As long as you have something, you know what you're spending, you know that you're building your pricing and all of that correctly.
Well, when you talk about timekeeping, a lot of people that are new to government contracting don't entirely know what you mean. And they'll say, well, that means I fill out a timesheet. But isn't there extra information on that timesheet that's really important? And there's rules about how often they have to fill it out. Yes. Tell us some more about that.
Yes, so there are rules, and it really is hard to get some commercial businesses. Maybe they've been in business a while and they're used to doing things a certain way. Getting them to drink that government Kool-Aid can be very difficult. Like, why do I have to do that? I only have a fixed price contract. Well, we're finding more and more of those actually being audited. So you have to fill out your timesheet daily. You have to say, what you're working on. You have to count for all of your time. So not just 3 hours I worked on the contract today and I don't have to put anything else on my timesheet. The government doesn't want to see that. They want to know what you did for the business indirect, if you were out, whatever it is, you need to account for your full day, whether it's 8 hours or 15 hours, it needs accounted for. And if you make changes, you have to have a record of an audit trail of why you made a change on your timesheet.
Well, it's super important because you've got to be able to bill sometimes against that timesheet. You have to be able to also use it for pricing in the future. And I'm always explaining to people, I'm sorry that you're the CEO of the company and you'd prefer not to fill out a timesheet, but we're not on the honor system here anymore. And actually, on a lot of timesheets, there'll be a certification, I hereby certify, and there's an approval process and everything. But the main thing I try to explain to people is, listen, you're a federal contractor. You want them to pay you for the hours that worked. You've got to be able to say, these are the hours I worked. And what I always think is funny, right around the holidays or whatever, people will be forgetting that you have to put your time down as holiday for, say, the 4th of July. Or did you take a couple of days off? Because otherwise you're not accounting. It's what, don't they call it like total time accounting?
Yes, yes. So accounting for all of your time, total time accounting. They, like I said, they want to see everything, whether it's, holiday is separate. They know you're not charging that to the government. Bid and proposal. They want to be sure you're not charging your proposal time to that new contract you won, right? You've got to have that separated. And the labor piece of a contract is the biggest risk to the government. So that's key. You actually, if you have a good timekeeping system, you can keep on QuickBooks maybe for a little longer because if you have that key area covered.
Well, I think what you're talking about is so important because people don't think about the different functional areas of a government contracting organization. I mean, every company has a corporate function, but in government contracting, it's called what? G&A, general.
Oh, sorry, I got you.
People ask me this stuff all the time. So I always say, well, your headquarters, you're running the business, that's general administrative. And usually that runs 12, 15% of your cost. If you're higher than that, you're going to lose money or you're not going to be competitive. And so I always tell people, if I don't know who's charging that, I'm going to be not profitable and not competitive.
Yes, exactly.
And then they talk to me about overhead. What's overhead? Can you tell me what overhead is?
Yeah, so overhead, overhead, and it's commonly misunderstood. My coworkers and I that work together and work with the clients are constantly having to educate on what the difference is from that and G&A. And our favorite line is, but for the contracts, you would not have overhead. So overhead is everything it takes to cover your direct individuals that are working on contracts, support them with training, travel, meetings, or anything that they do that supports a contract, and sometimes even the management oversight of a large group of contracts where you can't specifically identify your time to one specific cost objective or contract, if you will.
Well, a good example of that would be some of the project management activities that you have to have as a company, or access to software to run project information that's unique. Another thing that I think has really come up in the last several years is companies in federal contracting are spending so much money on recruiting, verifying people's clearances, the facility security clearance operations, that type of thing. That can all be overhead. And what I try to remind them is, let's pretend that Jenny has a company over here and Traci has one over there. And Traci has invested all of her money in making sure her people have all the credentials to get government work. And I'm not keeping track of it. I'm not using that as a sales technique. Who's going to win with that strategy?
I am.
Right. Because it's like whatever you are doing as a company that gives you unique capabilities in your technical area, that is overhead, generally speaking, because, keep doing the accounting, things like that. That's just, every company has to do that. But what you're doing is saying, if I had 2 divisions, what would be their costs? Those would be overhead costs.
Yeah. And the good thing is the government, I mean, they're going to pay G&A, but G&A to the government is fluff, right?
It's
So
tax.
yes, it needs to be low. They will buy into overhead much better than they will buy into G&A cost.
Well, and one of the areas where there's been so much shift in that in the last few years is software cost, where companies have to buy pretty expensive software to run some of their projects, or they may need to have databases where they can do testing. They could have software licenses specifically to support their technical area. And you want to put in your proposals, we've invested in this type of software, we run it this way. Things that make you unique are really all part of overhead. The other thing you talked about is knowing their spending. And here's a big one. A lot of times I work with a small business that's getting started and they say, we just want a contract. Well, how much is it worth? I don't know. When does it start or end? Not sure. How many people are going to be able to work on it? All of those things, knowing that information differentiates you from your competitor. And more than anything else, accounting is about how do we show up differently? How do we run our business to take care of our employees and our customers? And so when we talk about government contracting, I think one of the things that differentiates a small company from one that's really on the right track is understanding, okay, I've got two projects with Army. Here's what they are. Here's what we do. And even when they're prepared to do that for proposals, write down what they're doing. It's like, this is accounting data that's used to sell your company, to tell people how good you are. So how do you, I think that's one of the reasons why people need specialized accounting software, right?
Yeah, it is. They need to be able to, separate that type of information from what they're doing. And also just know that's what shows them what they're spending, right? And what they need to propose and get to the right place within each contract.
Well, and it's also part of what we would call past performance. So it's accounting data that's really critical to being able to win bids. So when we talk about companies that are competing in the federal contracting arena are really finding out that every single thing they can do to give themselves some leverage to say we've accomplished these things is super important. And when you're small, you think, I don't have time to keep track of that. Mm-hmm. So that's why you have to put in systems that are doing that. Another thing people talk about is just their pipeline of what they're bidding on and how to do that. You've got to structure things in so you know what you're going after. And when you win it, how are you going to set up that project? How are you going to run it? So many project managers will complain, okay, I wasn't on that bid. I don't know what they did. I have no idea how they came up with that pricing, but now I've got to have the data to run a contract. And that's what our accounting software has to be capable of, which is unique. I mean, commercial companies don't run that way, but with here, you might be doing the same kind of work for the Army and the Navy, but you've got an Army contract and a Navy contract. You got to keep it straight, right?
Yes. You have to be able to separate your contracts, know what each one is costing you and each component of that. And however you're bidding, you at a minimum, you have to track your costs at the level that you bid. You cannot track at a higher level.
And then you have to be able to use that history when you're bidding other proposals.
Exactly. You have to have reliable information going into another proposal, because that's a question they're going to ask. How are you estimating? What does your estimating look like?
Well, you bring up a great question. So we've been in this business for a long time, both of us. And so we can talk all day long about accounting systems. What I'm seeing coming up more and more is in proposals. And when the prime contractors send out what's called a representation and certification, or a rep and cert, they've got check boxes that didn't used to be there before. And those are things where it says, do you have a DCAA approved accounting system? And I don't know about you, but if I had 6 contractors come to do something to my house, and I had one question that would differentiate, that would be how I would knock them out of competition. And everybody needs to have filters these days for who you're going to work with and who you're not going to work with. So if I show up and you're the prime contractor, say Lockheed, And we get on the phone. I say, well, Traci, what is DCAA? Are you going to return my phone call?
No, I'm not going to.
Why not?
Because you can tell you have not done work in the government, or at least not anything that's applicable to what I need you to do.
Right. You haven't done your homework. You don't
No.
understand the business, and you don't understand the customer, in our example, Lockheed, and what Lockheed wants and expects. They've got people standing in line to do business with them. And on a particular large effort, they might have 20 subcontractors or something like that. Those contractors will get dropped off the team as soon as they fail to respond. It's a filtering game. And if you're not able to respond, you can't do it. The other thing is, people don't think about accounting systems as big as you and I do. To me, I also think about, okay, we hired somebody that's a senior engineer. I need to know what's on his resume in case I have to bid him in the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've been talking a lot about, how do you have a system that encompasses everything? And so when we talk to small businesses that are getting started, it's overwhelming, right?
It's very overwhelming. Yes.
And so how do you, when you get to companies though that you've been talking to for a while, and talk to them about what they need to do, or they call up and say, how do I control this? It's their payroll system. What are the other elements that you can think of that we really would consider to be part of their entire system that they have to have under control?
So even from timekeeping that we talked about, okay, yes, the payroll system, your accounting system, obviously. And then there's also, your estimating and budgeting. I'm not sure what direction you're going, but there's so many.
Well, I think the thing is that when you first start out, it's just a couple of people starting the company, and they can handle getting themselves paid, and they can handle filling out timesheets, and they can handle billing a couple people. But the whole idea that we're trying to help these companies is get to where the founders of the company have people working for them that do all these functions. But so often they see the word accounting system and they think, well, that's QuickBooks. But we also have to take into account everything that goes in and out of it. So that's payroll systems.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm running into a lot is, for companies that are really successful, they all actually have to go all the way back to the point at which they're recruiting people for jobs.
Yeah. Now,
And it becomes an entire trail.
I see a question in that about when do companies seek us out for our services? And you know what? It varies. Some companies come in right when they're maybe they have one contract, or they've got a bid and they think they're going to win. And those are companies that have really paid attention and think, I need to find out what to do. So even if they don't sign on with us at that minute, if we guide them a little bit and get them to the right place, some of them come on and they want everything right away. Like, I've got a plan, I'm doing this. And we had a couple of companies, they came in as one person. We set them up in the right place. We still started with QuickBooks, and then as they advanced, we got to the better systems. And then I will tell you that some of them come to us after they're already in trouble. So they haven't done the right thing, because they may have talked to us in the beginning, but they think we're crazy. How could I have to do all that? I actually had someone say to me, how can you expect a small business to spend this money, to be a government contractor? I said, because there is a cost of doing business with the government, and the government will pay for it, but you have to put it in place. So that happens, and they come back later when they're going through audit, or they can't get this contract because they can't check that box, as you mentioned.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point of, we want to work with companies toward, here's what you need when you're small, when you get a little bit bigger, and when you get a little bit bigger. And I think that's a very important point, because I see so many companies start out on QuickBooks, which is affordable. That's where they need to start. That's where everybody starts. But at the same time, by the time they get up to about 50 people, if they're still on that, it's like, oh gosh, this is going to be painful to switch.
Yes, exactly. So we really
what's the magic number for you? I say between 25 and 50 people. You've got to get off QuickBooks. What's your magic number?
I don't really have a magic number honestly. It does get to be a pain. but I can usually prove to them that there is a cost benefit to upgrading sooner rather than later. They'll say, I want to wait for this next contract. Everybody wants to wait for the next contract. And I tell them, get ahead of that contract, because you're just going to end up with more complexity, more people, like you said, and more things to track, or you're going to be up for audit. You're going to have a pre-award on a contract, and you can't even go through a pre-award. So if we can convince them and do it reasonably, right? It's got to be cost reasonable. We're not asking them for the full, and we will invest with them as they grow. But not, there's a point that it makes sense cost wise to go ahead and do that, get that upgrade, get things in place ahead of time. And if they listen, I don't think anybody's been disappointed yet that they were prepared.
Well, I think you made some really good points about what we're talking about is scalability. Are you prepared to execute? Because you have to show you have a plan of what you would do if you were to win that contract. And even in the boilerplate that you issue when you do a proposal, it'll usually ask for a description of accounting system. And it's such a big difference to see somebody that knows exactly the wording to use and how they're going to do it. And I even have a lot of people that will say, this is what we're on, but we are planning to upgrade to XYZ in the next 12 months or something like that, so that you can show you have a path. Hey, Alan asked a great question. Alan asked, does your company help develop policies to round out a company's compliant DCAA system?
Yes, absolutely. That's a big part of what you need. It's not just having it, it's actually saying what you're doing, how you're doing it, and being able to answer to that when the government looks at that. But it's a big part of what they will audit. They want to see it in writing. What
well,
are
and
you
they
doing?
usually want to see, at least 10 or 12 pages if you're a small business that says, this is how we handle timesheets and payroll, what the steps are that were processed, so that theoretically, if somebody who was doing that function left, somebody else could pop in and follow those instructions. That's really the goal. And that's why it works. It's so much fun to work with veterans, because they always ask, where's my SOP? Where's my SOP?
Exactly. Because other people don't think that's important, right? But
right.
You're right.
Yeah. But when you're working with veteran business owners, they have expectations of what a system should look like, and they have high standards, and they expect it to be well documented.
And they will listen when you give them advice.
Right.
And that's, I can't ask for a better client than that.
Yeah.
That actually, will listen. They've asked you for advice and they will actually listen. So
yeah. Well, and I think that's really important. What our goal is always is to give people choices and tell them what some options are, let them know to expect, and communicate it over a long enough period of time consistently. So they're like, oh, I didn't need it then, but I think something we talked about, I do need now.
yeah.
So Traci, if people want to reach out to Cordia Partners, talk to you, how do they reach you?
Well, they can email me at Shepps, TSHEPPS at CordiaPartners.com. We also have a website, CordiaPartners.com as well. So
okay. So they can reach out to you that way. So thanks so much for being on, Traci. We're so glad that you're part of GovCon Summit, which is coming up. And it is really, in a way, it's a coaching conference for small businesses and federal contracting to show them how to play the game of GovCon, how to be successful, how to create a network around you, and what you need to do. So thanks so much for being on with us today, Traci.
Thank you, Jenny, very much. Looking forward to another great conference.